Hi, it's March 4th, 2022. We're here to interview Jeff Adams. We're up in the panhandle of Florida, and he actually lives in Fort Walton Beach. Jeff, I understand that your family was a military family.
Yeah, my dad was Air Force. They're originally from Pennsylvania, and he was stationed at Eglin, which is the Air Force's testing center in the Fort Walton Beach, Niceville area. We moved there in '62 when I was 5, and I was fortunate enough, with the exception of 1 year, to just stay there. So that it's kind of unusual for a military brat to not move around, but I grew up in the same town basically, and then stayed after he got transferred out to Virginia and back home to Pennsylvania. I just stayed. So, and I'm glad that.
And where did you go to school? Go to high school and college?
I went to Southern Miss for college. I'm a Niceville grad. I grew up. The base was zoned to that school. And so I went all through school with the exception of 1 year that Dad was overseas. So we went to Pennsylvania, and there's an interesting story there, especially for a band director. I'd played a lot of sports growing up, and was played quarterback, believe it or not, on 2 championship base. The Air Force base sponsored all these sports. And I was on 2 championship football teams. I played quarterback. I know that may be hard to believe. And when we moved to Pennsylvania, I wanted to play football there because I assumed that I was, going to be the next thing. And I went in to told the band director that I wanted to go try out. I was going to go try out for football. And he said, if you go try out for football, I don't want to ever see you in the band room again. And that made a huge impression on me, which I think I've taken into my teaching career, to never put kids in the spot where they have to choose between band and something else. There's always a way to make it work and talk to the other coaches and sponsors and figure out that there's some kind of compromise. But that's one of the examples of things that happened growing up that made the impression that I'm never going to do it that way when I get the chance. So
you went to Ole Miss, and then what?
I've perished the thought. Southern Miss.
Oh.
If you say Ole Miss to Southern Miss grads, you get in trouble. But I went to Southern, and the truth is I went to Southern as a junior. I had done a 1.5 years plus at the local community college. I came out of high school initially. While I was in high school, I thought I was going to go into the Air Force. I went to the Air Force Academy physical and all that stuff, and I should have known. This is one of those ways that God is trying to give you a message and you don't quite know, you're not mature enough or whatever at the time to recognize it. But in my academy physical, when they got done, the guy came out and he said, well, you're blind as a bat. You're never going to qualify for the academy. He said, but you hear like a dog. Maybe you ought to do something that uses that.
Wow.
So,
wow.
The truth is, after my senior year in high school, I was one of those times that we went back to Pennsylvania to visit relatives. Dad had a 30-day leave during the summer, and we would go visit family and stay with family. And while we were there in the summer of '74, the Santa Clara Vanguard came to the local high school and was practicing the entire week leading up to DCI finals. And I'd grown up in a 6-5 Texas A&M style military band. I had never seen anything like that. And it was one of those moments where I said, I think I could do this. And I came back, and by coincidence, again, one of those God things, all the classes that I was supposed to register for at the community college, or the junior college then, were closed. And so I told my parents, well, I'm just going to take some music classes and see how this goes. And I guess, as they say, the rest is history. I finished there and then went to Southern. And truth is, at Southern, it was not, I didn't have the foundation to really go into music. I mean, looking back, if I had to talk to a student who was me from then, I would not suggest that they take music as a major. I was not a great player. I had not had any lessons. I didn't really have the solid musical foundation that you need to get a good start. And so I got to Southern. I did one semester in Alan Cox's trumpet studio, and that was enough for him. It wasn't enough for me, but he demoted me out of the studio, or whatever you want to call it, to a teaching assistant named Rick Chapman. And Rick recognized pretty quickly that I didn't have the foundational skills to be where I was. And he gave me he developed, because I remember him sitting in the lesson and writing these things out. And he wrote me out a 2-page instruction sheet on how to practice from the very beginning, like it was the first time I'd ever come in from lessons. And he gave me what to do and how long to do it. And I still have those taped to the back of my Schlossberg is the page 2, and Clark, I think, is the page 1 of that, that I have always saved, because it was one of those moments where you realize that somebody who knows how to teach can fix things. And from then on, I started to progress. I obviously was successful enough to skate my way through an exit jury, barely. And that's all due to what he did as far as doing that. And then the irony of it is that became the format that I used teaching beginners. And I created this practice record form, not just to keep time, but to make sure that the kids every day were looking at the list of things that they needed to practice in the order that they needed to practice them in. A number of my former students who are now out teaching are using that. They don't use the exact form, but the same format, so that's been kind of rewarding. Although there are plenty of former students who still get on Facebook and give me a hard time about that practice record form they had to fill out. But so that got me through college, and while I was in college, I marched 2 years with the Blue Stars out of La Crosse. And to me, the funny thing there is everybody gave us a hard time at the time about being the only band in drum corps. that we weren't doing all the things that the fancy drum corps were doing, all the showy stuff. We were just about solid fundamentals, and the truth is, I really learned a lot about how to teach, spending those 2 years working on that 10 or 12 hours a day. Things were not quite as cushy as they are now with staying in a hotel and all that kind of stuff. But that was a real education that got me to the place then that when I came back to Southern for my internship, I interned with Don Varner at Niceville, and that put me in a position then that he called me. I went back to finish my last semester at Southern, and he called me pretty promptly and said, "Hey, the band director at Lewis Middle School, junior high at the time, is not coming back. I'd really like you to consider this job." And I didn't have any other options on the table. I think that was another God thing. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have any grand design about what I wanted to do. And he said, "You want this job?" And I said, "I'll take it." And so I went and did the interview and started at Lewis in the summer of 1979.
And did you stay there for your whole career?
No, I was at Lewis, I think, 3.5 years, and I at the end of that, well, it wasn't really my intent to leave, But 3.5 years obviously is in the middle of a school year that I changed schools. And the story there is Gary Medley was the band director at Pryor Middle School, which was at that point known as the Country Club in Okaloosa County. Well, put it this way, when I got there, the kids were all playing they had their own Holton or Conn 6D horns.
Wow.
They were all playing on Bach trumpets. They were all on Selmer clarinets. It was the country club mentality as far as the financial base of those kids. The story is I had not yet gotten a superior in marching. In those days we called it contest. I hadn't gotten a one at a marching contest yet, and had worked for those 4 years and had gotten the program going. It started with 27 kids in the band and it was up to 60, and things were starting to happen. And I honestly prayed about the situation as to whether or not I should take this job. It's pretty difficult when the principal calls you and says, "Hey, I hear you're the man. We want you to come." I mean, there wasn't an interview. It was you got the job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, let me pray about this. And I kept getting the message that you can't go now. You got to wait. You got to finish what you started with these kids. And so I went to the interview because you had to have an official interview. And the other half of the story is I felt like I couldn't be the one that, I don't know what the right word is, told them how they could make this work. Needless to say, I'd calculated all kinds of solutions. But he said, look, I told the guy, I said, I can't take this job now. I feel like I've made a commitment. And he was a little bit offended maybe. And I said, look, if I were working for you, you would expect me to do the same thing for you. You wouldn't want somebody to just bail on you. I know you were very upset to be put in the lurch. And he said, well, you got a good point. He said, is there any way you know of that you can make this work? And I figured that was my lead to come up with a solution. So the second hardest conversation was then to go to Don Varner, who was then at Choctaw, and I had interned with Don, and ask him if there was any way that he and Randy Nelson could keep the program functioning until we got to the end of football season. And I was somewhat amazed because I didn't think it would happen, but he agreed. So Don taught the beginners during the day, and Randy did the marching band after school for the 5 or 6 weeks to finish it. And then I started there at Pryor, I was there 23 and a half years.
Wow.
So,
And to clarify, these are junior high programs.
they were junior highs at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably 6 or 8 years in at Pryor, the county switched everything to middle schools.
And it became middle school programs, but the point being, junior high and middle school bands marched.
Well, and they, up until, even when we switched to middle school, we did standing band.
Mm-hmm.
But when we were junior highs, it was a full-blown little high school. And the expectations were such that there was no uncertain terms that you were going to the FBA contest and then it became festival before it was MPA. There was no question that you were going to take your band and the only way you were going to stick around very long was if you were making superior ratings. So there was even with the junior highs, there was a huge expectation.
Now, did you feel that as a heavy pressure, or was there some support?
The truth is, if I'm completely honest, it was an extremely heavy pressure. But it's one that people didn't talk about much. It was just kind of, the expectation was, the county has been known to have, there are a good number of Hall of Fame band directors that came out of Okaloosa County. And the point of that is that there was an expectation there, because those people were so successful and so effective, that everybody else that came in was going to also be successful and effective. Just by way of illustration, Paul Harris and I started, he was at Meigs, the other feeder school for Choctaw, and I started the same year in '79. We had been teaching 20 years in the county, and we were still the two rookies.
Wow.
Nobody else in 20 years had come into the county after the two of us, because it was that stable and people just stayed.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a great expectation there, but that was also married with the fact that the camaraderie and the support amongst the directors. I mean, we would, during the summer, everybody would finish band on Thursdays and we'd go play 9 holes of golf. Whether you could play very well or not, it was all about the fellowship. And we were constantly getting together at Joe Hooten's house or Ernest Hebson's house, and, you know, just hanging out and talking about things, spending time with each other, the middle school guys would go to the high school rehearsals and help out or just go watch, and then the high school guys were coming in and helping you with what was doing. And the biggest thing was everybody was just a phone call away. If you had a question, you didn't, I think the expectation was you didn't hesitate to ask, because you know if you screwed it up, they were gonna, somebody's gonna say something, why didn't you call me? But I think that's a real reason for the success in that area, is because of that. It wasn't just the unspoken expectation, it was the spoken help that everybody was to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very, there's not too many jobs that you have that kind of camaraderie, and, everybody got along pretty well, and there wasn't a whole lot of, it was very competitive, but it wasn't negatively competitive. I think it was a very positive atmosphere, and that was a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that still exists?
Oh yeah, it's very strong. The county is still very strong. The population has moved around, and things are much different than they were, in those early days. But there's still the expectation, not just for the band programs, but I think that's an expectation within our school district in Okaloosa County for the academics, for the sports, for everything. And I honestly, I think that comes from the fact that there's a huge military community there, that advancement, making rank, doing the next thing, it's kind of in the culture of the area, and those are the kind of students that we teach. Those are there's a huge band parent community support, and a lot of those people are high-end professional. They're the people who are testing the top military munitions and avionics and all those kind of systems at the base. So they're all at the top of their game, or they wouldn't be at that Air Force base, because that's a test center for the Air Force.
Wow.
And so that mentality kind of just breeds itself into the community.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. We've come now to the heart of the interview, where you get to share some words of wisdom to the new directors and to directors who may have been teaching for quite a while that need a new spark.
I think the biggest retirement has been good. The good news there is I didn't have any choice, because the drop extension was cut off, and so I couldn't do the other 3 that I was planning on. But the advantage of that is it took the decision completely out of my hands. So, it just was what it was. But I've had a lot of time, needless to say, we're not spending near the hours at the band room or on the practice field that I did. And I've had a lot of time to think about band directing in general. And, I love that scene in Shawshank Redemption. It's the parole scene, the second or third parole scene, where he goes in and he says, I wish I could go back and talk to that kid. I wish I could tell him, what I know. And I guess he'd been in prison 40 years or something. But the whole idea is that band directing is a whole lot more complex than people give it credit for. The amount of things that you have to know and know about is I don't think that there are any people coming out of college getting started in band directing that really have a clue what the depth of skill is that you have to really be successful, that you have to do. You have to be able to administrate, you have to be able to politic with the school administration and the other teachers, you have to be able to manage the parents and the money, all that's, you have to be able to discipline large groups. All those things are completely unrelated to the musical things, and we all know that the musical side of it, when you have all the different types of instruments with the fundamentals of being able to play those, to make the adjustments, to play them well, and then there's the whole musical analysis of what's in the score that you have to, there's a whole mechanical side that you have to get the kids to play, and then there's the whole musical side of what's on the page, and then there's the third part, which is what's implied. You start talking about this and listing things out like I've just tried to do briefly, and it's really a big task. And the first thing I would say is be patient with yourself. Don't feel, recognize that you don't know it and that you're going to have to work to get, what you got. Don Varney used to say, I wish I could give you a pill that would let you skip 10 years, but you can't. And I didn't understand that at the time, but I do now. So I think it's look at the depth of the task that you have to do, and just if I had any cause for success, it was first that I was pretty good at the administration side. I could manage, stuff, get things sequenced out, figure out what's going on with the setting things up. And that allowed me the opportunity to figure out how to teach. And because the whole teaching skill is something that it comes over time. And I was very blessed. I didn't say this earlier, but when I first started, besides being in that culture in Okaloosa County, Wayne Whitman was working with playground music. And he would call on the school once a week. And basically what he did, there wasn't a whole lot of business involved. There was a whole lot of mentoring. And he would come in, and sometimes he would tell me how to do it and then get me to do it. Other times he would do it and let me watch. Other times he would watch me do it and fail, and then he would take me in the office and wear me out for an hour about how and the culture, growing up a military brat, that didn't bother me at all. It was like boot camp. And, thank you, sir, may I have another? and he did that for a couple of years. He would come in and I'm convinced, I've had the opportunity to tell him many times, I've had the opportunity when he comes in to work the band, to say that to him in front of the kids, but I will never forget that kind of help. And I think that's out there still. When I got to Pryor, Whit actually took my job. He replaced me at Pryor, or at Lewis. So he was no longer available as my mentor, and God would have it that Laurel Brownlee was working for a music store in Pensacola. I can't recall the name, but then he did the same thing. And honestly, if I thought Whit was tough, Laurel was he was a Colonel Irons Texas boy, and he was even, more to the point than Whit ever was. But those two guys really just took me under wing and helped shape the way that I taught and from the musical side, how I approach things. And so getting back to the question, you got to not be afraid to take those knocks. It's okay to not be good at something, but you got to recognize, I'm not so good at this. Who can I ask, or who can I get to come help me? And I'm really, on July 1st, whenever my FRS quarantine is up, I'm really looking forward to. And I told the people at FRS when I called them to say, are you really serious about, I can't pay this forward. That's what I really want to do, is to be able to pay it forward to the next generations of the folks that are coming out.
Well, I'm sure you will, and I'm sure the gentleman who helped you appreciated the fact that you were willing to listen, and they could see you at least attempting to apply what they had advised.
Whit's still doing it, believe it or not. He's still going out to the schools, and somebody actually said, I think it was Eddie Stedman, said that he had seen Whit at one of the other schools, and he wished at in his age that he was still as passionate about getting it right as Whit was. And I think that's a great legacy to have left to all of us.
Well, and I see that in you, that you're not done. You're going to change where you stand in the band room. You won't be center front, but you'll still be there.
I hope so.
And you'll be passing the information on. I know that's what you're looking forward to. What do you do for fun?
Well, and I should say this too. The other thing that I think is important, besides that getting help and having mentors, is you have to be really lucky and blessed for who you get for a partner.
Oh, 100%.
So the cool thing is I'm getting to spend a lot more time with my wife, and I think she's okay with that. We're able to travel, can go at the drop of a hat to go see my daughter in Jacksonville, and we're looking forward to doing some of those things. Somebody asked me if I was going to practice my horn, which truth is I was never really all that excited about that. That was a means to an end. But I am going to, my goal is to be a scratch golfer.
Oh.
And I know that's as impossible as being a really good trumpet player, so it's an equal task. But I like spending time outside. I still like doing yard work as long as I can, and those kind of things, puttering around the house. And it's just, it's good. I feel good about not having to do the day-to-day grind. I told somebody earlier last week that being retired and getting to go into band rooms and help out like that, it's kind of like being a grandparent. You love on them a little bit, and then you hand them back to the actual parents, and I think that's a good thing.
So you're becoming the grand director.
We'll see.
And in some places, the great grand director. Well, we almost run out of time, but I know there's a story you'd like to tell.
Yeah, I hope I can get through this. Everybody gives me a hard time about getting choked up in front of the groups, but it's a good thing to be passionate about what you do. And the part of this that got to me the most recently is the fact that you don't really realize it's all about the kids. When all this whole conversation, it's really about the impact that you have on the individual kids. And I was sitting at a ball game. My wife's always had season tickets, And now I get to sit with her at the Niceville games, which is a whole lot of fun. And people come up, to say hi and such. And one night this year, I had two things within 5 minutes of each other that just really kind of put a button on it. One was a former flag student, because I was responsible for the auxiliaries at Niceville, and she came up, and at first I had to try to figure out and remember her name. It was not like she was one of the stars, and I figured that out. She told me that she was at school, at college, and she just wanted to thank me because being in the class made her want to teach.
Wow.
And not 2 minutes later, a mother came up and she said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "Yeah." And I told her the son's name, and she said, "Well, he passed away this past summer. He was a special needs kid. He had done 4 years in band." I mean, it was nothing particularly eventful. He wasn't the kind of kid that's going to be your first cheer all-county player or make all-state. He just was, band was good for him. And she said, "Just wanted to thank you. Before John passed away this summer, we were talking about all the things that were, that he really liked about life." And he said, "I really like band." He said, "Mr. Adams always treated me like everybody else." And that's what we should be doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, on that heartfelt note, our half hour has passed, and it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And as a final PS at the bottom, I want to thank FBA, not just for this legacy thing, but I should have said this earlier. It's the FBA system. They're kind of the railroad tracks that I was able to drive the train down. And if there hadn't been the system there with the evaluations and S&E and sitting in those rooms with the judges and hearing what things were supposed to be, that's the other part of it. If you were just independent, in the band room trying to build the band, and you didn't have the structure of FBA, I don't think most of us would have been successful either. So I got to get that on the record.
Well, you've certainly been successful and continue to be. So thank you for all you have done and all you will do.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.